I had first read about yoga in my, I think, 10th year in high school on my own. I grew up in Ohio on a farm. In my early mid-teens, I began to more actively seek answers to questions that I had, and began to read books taken from the public library. And I read Theo Spinar's book on Hatha Yoga and one of Paul Brunton's books, Research in Secret India. I had, from the book on Hatha Yoga, learned to do some of the Hatha Yoga routines and tried to meditate without any appreciable success, although I had a pronounced religious aspiration, and because I had grown up going to church on a regular basis, a fundamental church. And then when I was 18, my senior year in high school, I got sick. I had rheumatic fever. I was confined to bed for 5 months. I realized I had to make some changes in my life. I deepened my prayer life. I read nutrition magazines, which I had collected, trying to find some routine for restoring my body to wellness. And while reading one of the nutrition books, Bernard McFadden's magazine, Physical Culture, which was published in that era, I saw an ad for Autobiography of a Yogi. And I had seen the ad before, but had not responded earlier. Well, I ordered the book through the mail, and it arrived, and I read it. And I was just fascinated by the book and the photos of the saints, especially the Guru line. And I resolved right then that I must meet Master, and I felt that he was my Guru. And so when I got well later that summer, and then through the summer went through convalescing and getting my strength back, I was holding in my mind this idea of going to California, wondering how to arrange it. I didn't have any money. But in November of that year, I left home and I hitchhiked. First I went to Florida, thinking that I would earn some money and then go to California. And I worked as a fry cook for 2 weeks, and then I tried to sell magazines from door to door for 2 or 3 weeks, and that was not so good. And then I hitchhiked from Tampa, Florida to Los Angeles. And I arrived just a few days before Christmas. I spent the first day upon my arrival at the Los Angeles Public Library in the religion philosophy section, getting up my courage to go to Mount Washington and thinking about how will I make my approach. I think I might have sent a postcard along the way to say that I'm coming, but I had no clear communication on the matter. I had taken the SRF lessons earlier that summer. Up to lesson 30, I think I learned the Hong Saw and the energization exercises. And it's true. And I remember when I got ready to go out to Mount Washington, it was in the evening, and about 4:30, and I asked someone the general direction to Highland Park area, and I was informed that I should go down here on Spring Street and get a streetcar going that direction. And then I got down to the recommended place, and I was curious about how far it would Highland Park was from where I was. And there was a liquor store on the corner, and I went in and I asked the proprietor, and he said, about 7 miles that way. And I thanked him and went out and picked up my suitcase and started walking because I didn't have any money. I left Tampa 10 days earlier with $5, and so at this time I didn't have any money, not even a dime for the streetcar. And he came out and he said, where are you going? And I told him. He said, here. He said, here's a dime for the streetcar fare. And so I got to the foot of the Mount Washington and started walking up the road, and a man stopped in his car and asked where I was going, and he said, "I'm going right by there, I'll drop you off." So he dropped me off at the gate, and the first person I met when I arrived in Mount Washington was Ralph Sherman. He was at the gatehouse at the time. House is not there anymore, and Ralph took me over to the boys' kitchen, men's kitchen, then underneath the main building. And my timing was good because it was dinner time. You remember that? Thank goodness. And I was introduced to some of the fellows who were there, and to Ananda. And then I remember Ananda asked me during the dinner interlude to meet him afterwards up on the ground floor, the main entrance room of the building. And we were up there talking, and he was inquiring about my background and what brought me there and so on. And I don't know to this day whether it was rigged that we should be there, or did Master just show up? Did he tell you to be there?
No? It was done just impromptu.
But I remember we were sitting there talking, and all of a sudden Swami stood up. He said, "Oh, Master's coming." And I learned later the signal was the elevator. We could hear the elevator coming down. And Master came out, followed by, was it Diamata and Virginia? There were 2 or 3 with him, and he was on his way out to his car that was parked out in the driveway. And I wish I could tell you that his first words were, "My son, at last you have come." But I remember he was dressed in his overcoat and his white scarf around his neck. And his first words were, "How old are you?" And he shook my hand and he said, how old are you? And I said, 18, sir. And then his next question was, "Do your parents know you've come?" And I said, "Well, it's all right." And then there were just a few words that passed, and then he touched me on the forehead and said, "I'll see you again," and he went out to the car.
But I could tell he was very pleased to meet you.
It was a good meeting, wasn't it? And then Ananda took me over to the boys' dorm, and they found a little bed over in the corner of that building. And the next day was the Christmas season meditation. And so it was marvelous timing, because for months now I had been dreaming of being with Master and living this life and so on. And the very next day was the all-day meditation in the chapel at Mount Washington headquarters. And I remember I was there at the scheduled time, and people were standing out in the main room because Master had not yet come down. And he was late that morning. I remember he was late coming down. And finally, when he came down, St. Lune was with him, and they walked very quietly into the chapel and sat, and then the rest of us went in, and we were directed to our seats. And I believe that meditation for that day only went about 6 hours, with the break in the midpoint. But of course there was Master talking, and there was chanting, and interludes for quiet meditation, and then more talking by Master, and then chanting, and then quiet time, and then a break. And then that went on into the afternoon. And then the next day was, I remember, was the down at Hollywood Church. It was on a Sunday. And after the Sunday service, Master talked that morning. And after the Sunday service, one of the sisters of the order came. I was outside on the grounds, and she said, "Master wants to see you later when he's seen everyone else." And Master reserved after the service to visit with people and interview people. And so later that afternoon, after everyone had been taken care of, I was invited in to be with Master, and he was sitting in the little waiting room just off the stage at the Hollywood Temple on a little couch. And when I came in, he motioned me to sit beside him. And he was quiet for a moment, and then he asked, "What can I do for you?" And I managed to say that I wanted to be his disciple. And he said, "How is your health?" And I said, "All right, as far as I know." And then he said, "Let's see." And he reached out with his hand and felt my pulse. And it was years later that I learned about pulse diagnosis, but I'm sure he could have known just directly without that touch. But he felt my pulse, and then he said, "Oh, you're all right." And then we talked a few minutes, and he said, "You know, this is not a path of escapism." And he said, "You stay." And so it was arranged, and I stayed there at Mount Washington. I entered into the routine. I did a variety of things. I swept the driveways and raked the lawns, and I worked 1 or 2 weeks, I remember, in the office supervised by Swami at that time, putting out the form letters for the correspondence course. 1 week, 1 or 2 weeks, I worked out at the lake shrine on the hill, digging down, helping to dig down some of the dirt from on the hill to slope the hill behind where now the gold domes are. And during that phase, I remember, during that interlude, when I would sit to meditate, and even when I was out there working, when I would pause for a little rest between, the digging and shoveling, I would feel, without any thought beforehand, I would feel this electric surge go up my spine. It would just start at the bottom and go like that. And we were sitting, I remember, one evening to meditate in the chapel. And I remember Joe Carbone was sitting next to me. And we sat down, and I sat there, and this current came up, just like that, and I went, I didn't make that noise, but it felt like that, And later he said, "What are you doing?" And I explained what the sensation was, and then he said, "Oh, that's because you're seeing Master now and then, and you're here in this environment." I didn't know in those days about Kundalini, Shaktipat, the transfer of the current from the Guru to the disciple, and so on. We were fortunate then to see Master quite often. It was very interesting how frequently Master would go out for a walk or go for a drive in the evening and come back. And when he would come, his car would pull into the driveway, some of the monks would be there, almost as though we were summoned. And yet no one said, "Oh, Master's coming, let's go down and meet him." But several of us would just be there. And we didn't hang out waiting for him to spring on us, surprise him. We'd just be there, and his car would pull in. And he'd open the back door and sit and talk with us. And that was always very nice. I was there about 2 months. And we could pin it down. Swami, do you recall when that year in 50 when they poured the foundation for India House?
I don't remember the month, no. I think it was...
Early spring.
I think it was early spring. I was out in the desert at that
Oh,
time.
okay. But this was just before he went to the desert.
No, then it would have been January.
Okay. Because...
Yes, because I helped pour it, I remember.
Okay. Well, I was down
They
there.
did it all by hand in those days. They didn't have trucks come.
Well, the trucks came, but we had to pound the walls, I remember, put the vibrators down in the...
Yeah. But I remember mixing, maybe the foundations, I remember mixing it. I'd have to throw the cement in.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You were on a different project. They were pouring, they were pouring the walls. Remember the walls?
And they had trucks then?
Yeah.
I
think you were doing the footings, the preliminary work.
That may be it.
Yeah.
Because then maybe after that I was in the desert. Okay.
But the day they poured the walls, at the end of the day, Reverend Bernard, one of the senior ministers at the time, came out. And he looked the situation over, and then he came over to me and he said, "Master wants to see you tonight at 7 o'clock. You be down by the men's kitchen." So we went back to Mount Washington, and I showered. We had our evening meal, and the other fellows went to wherever they wherever they wanted to go or had to go. And I sat there from 7 till about 11:30. And Master didn't show up. No one showed up. And by 11:30 I was tired and sleepy, and I wasn't depressed, I was just a little confused. But I was mainly tired, and I thought, well, maybe something happened, and I went to the boys' dorm and to sleep. The next morning, Bill Brown, one of the fellows, said, "Oh, Master came in about 12, and the first thing he did when he got here was he asked about you. And I offered to come and get you, but he said, no, I'll see him tomorrow." So the next day, Bernard tracked me down and said, "Master wants to see you tonight at 7 o'clock, the same place." And so that night I was there and resolved to stay there. And I was there till about 10:30, same story. And then all of a sudden there was a flurry of activity, and his car was brought to the entrance of the basement of the building. Luggage was brought down, disciples showed up and lined the hallway, and Master was going to go to the desert. His 29 Palms, and after a while, word came down that he's not going tonight. Put the car away. So the disciples went back to their rooms, and the car was put away, and I was all by myself again. And then I heard the elevator come down, and the door opened, and Master stuck his head out. I remember that. He was dressed to go out for a walk. He had his overcoat on and his felt hat, and he stuck his head out, and he looked, and he said, "There's my boy." And he said, "Follow me," and he took me to Reverend Bernard's room just a few feet away and knocked on the door. He wasn't. If there was a buzzer on the door, I never saw him use it. He pounded on the door. And he called Bernard, and Bernard opened the door, and there was another fellow in there, Cliff Fredericks. And Master was eating some blanched almonds, and I didn't have any judgment, but I noticed that because he had said a few days earlier in just conversation with some disciples that we should eat the natural almonds, and only a few would chew them very well. And here he had the blanched almonds. I guess it was left over from the Christmas season. And I happened to glance at him, and he said, "Oh, first thing I've had to eat all day." And over in his left hand, and his right hand was free, and he said, "Kneel down." And I knelt, and he said, Shir Teswar said to me, when he accepted me, he said to me, "No matter what you do or fail to do, I pledge you my unconditional love." He said, "Now I tell you that whatever you do or fail to do, I will pledge you my unconditional love. Can you pledge that same love to me?" And I was getting sort of filled up at this time, and I said, "Yes, sir." And he had me stand up. And then he said, will you do what I ask?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "I want you to go to Phoenix. We have a project there." And so the next day I was on the train going to Phoenix, Arizona. And the project was a goat dairy. That Herbert Freed, who was only a year or two older than myself, but was the minister at Phoenix, had gotten this idea of a business project that would bring in money for the center activity and serve as a working environment for some of the male monastics. And so St. Linda put the money up, and they had purchased 5 acres out in Scottsdale, about 10 miles out of Phoenix, and it had 25 goats on the property, and a milk house to process the milk, to pasteurize it, small shed, and one little cottage for living quarters, and that was it. Well, I had grown up on a farm, and so I knew how to work with animals. Besides, when the Master said, "I want you to go to Phoenix," he said, "We have a project there." And then he said, "Besides, the climate will be good for your health." So he sent me over there. And I met Herbert, and Herbert just told me these wonderful tales about how much money we were going to make and how the how the business was going to expand, and how Master would be pleased, and St. Lin would be happy. And so I lived out at the dairy for a year. And I won't go into the details on that, but it was obvious that we couldn't make any money with 25 goats. So Herbert arranged for St. Lin to buy some more. So we had 125 goats, and we had to build adobe brick barns to house them, the extra ones. And so we scheduled the breedings that we'd always have 60 or 70 milking at peak production capacity. And so it was marvelous that first year, get up early in the morning, meditate for an hour or so, get up and feed and milk the goats, and then do whatever had to be done on the property, irrigating the pasture and doing maintenance work and so forth. And then in the evening, again, the milking and the feeding routine. And then after that, 3 or 4 hours of meditation. That's when I got into deeper meditation on my own. At Mount Washington, as Ananda was the supervisor of the men's activities, we had our morning and evening meditations, and then we were encouraged to meditate on our own during private time. But over there was where I had the opportunity to experiment with longer meditations at night, 3 and 4 hours. And I would meditate until I couldn't stay awake, really. I'd meditate until sleep would overtake me. Then I would lie down and rest. And Master told me that he wanted me to come to see him at least every 60 days at first. So every 2 months I would come to California, bring the bus over from Phoenix, and he was at 29 Palms, so I would stop at Banning and take the limousine out to 29 Palms. And there was a cottage out there just a few miles from where Master lived, where I would stay. But during the day, I would be taken over to Master's place, the property where he lived. And there were 2 houses there. Ananda probably has told you about the facility. And sometimes help out on the ground. Sometimes there wasn't much to do, or sometimes just be there. But always in the evening, if the weather was good, Master would come out for a walk, and he would invite me and others sometimes, but if others weren't there, just me, to go for a walk around the perimeter of the grounds, and that was always nice to do. If the weather was cold, he would invite me into the living room of his house to talk. And so those were the intimate times I had with Master. They weren't very long in duration. And then I would come over, of course, to California for the special events, the dedications of the various shrines and temples, and also for the Kriya service, the convocations, and Master's birthday, Christmas meditation, and so on. But I remember walking with Master the first year, walking with Master around his property at 29 Palms, and I wasn't very outgoing, and I used to like to hear him talk. I preferred him to tell me things rather than, I didn't want to just talk, ask questions, and I certainly had nothing to say, original. And we were walking, and he said, "Do you have any questions?" And a thought came to mind. I had been wondering. And I asked him, how many of the masters mentioned in your book, Autobiography of a Yogi, are liberated? And he said, he didn't pause, he said, "Oh, not many." He said, "Many saints are content to be absorbed in the ecstasy of God communion and don't aspire to anything beyond that, don't aspire to the higher state." And it was interesting how, to me, even then, how quick he would answer, and to the point, and as though he expected you to understand. You have that experience too. He would just tell you. He wouldn't say, "Oh, you couldn't understand if I explained it." He never said that to me. He would just tell you straight out. So those were marvelous times to be with him alone. And then when the goat dairy was closed down, I was transferred to Phoenix to be the sort of an apprentice under Herbert and maintain the grounds and maintain the buildings. And I remember the Sunday Bob came, and Herbert did go with him over to California. I saw Master a few weeks before he passed. Well, I'll back up just a little bit. I was ordained. Bob mentioned how he was ordained. I was ordained by Master personally in the autumn of 1951. I was 20 years of age. I was not yet 21. There had been no prior discussion of this. I assumed that eventually I would be a representative of the Guru line. Well, that was in my mind, but there was no formal planning and so no discussion of the matter. I was just there to work and to meditate and to be with Master and to let things unfold. I was visiting Mount Washington with Herbert on one occasion in the autumn of '51, and we were scheduled, we had been there a few days, we were scheduled to depart on a certain day. The night before, we happened to be at the entrance of Mount Washington, the main building, when Master came in. Several monks were there. And Master stopped and talked with us. And then he said to Herbert and myself, he said, you two come with me. And we went with him up the elevator to the 3rd floor. And he sat in a chair just outside the room where he used to have interviews with people, in the hallway. And Herbert stood in front of him, and I stood to one side. And he asked questions about the Phoenix Center and the people there he knew, and gave us some pointers on what to do there. And addressing most of his comments to Herbert, who was the minister then. And then he paused, and I could always tell when he was going to terminate our time together, because there was that pause. And then just out of the blue, he turned to me, he said, kneel down. So I knelt by his chair. He put his hands on my head, and he said, I ordain you a minister of self-realization. Heal, teach as I have taught, heal as I have healed, and initiate devotees into Kriya Yoga. And that was how quick it was, just like that. And I remember Herbert standing right in front of him and said, sir, it is right to initiate into Kriya Yoga. No, I took it at that time that he meant in the future, not immediately, And but Herbert asked, oh, is right to initiate into Kriya Yoga? And Master said, you too, the same God who is in me is in you. What I have done, you should do. I remember his direct words. And then it was just after his memorial service in March of '52 that Dayamata presented me with the paperwork certificate signed by Rajasi and Sister Durga, Florina Darling. 2 days after, it was dated 2 days after Master passed, because my birthday is March 9, and I was then 21, and I could not be legally ordained in California until my 21st birthday. But Master passed on the 7th of March. I had seen him a few weeks prior to that at the desert retreat. I remember I went into his living room in his house, and he was sitting in this big reclining chair that St. Lin had given him for either a Christmas or a birthday present a year or two before. And he was just bubbling. And he said, I finished the Gita. I remember that. He said, I finished the Gita. He said, a little while ago, he said, I was just here resting, with my eyes closed, and in the spiritual eye I saw this gold light. And I opened my eyes, and I saw that light, and he pointed about where the ceiling and the wall came together. He said, I saw it right there. And he said, Babaji, Paramahansa, and Sri Yukteswar came and smiled their blessings. They were so happy that I finished the book. And then we talked for a little while, and he told me, he said, you go all the way in this lifetime. That's the way he talked to me, and I'm sure he talked to others here the same way. He never said to me, if you work hard, if you're diligent, you'll come back next time in a good environment and get a good start, on spiritual growth. No, he said, you go all the way in this time. He said, when Sri Yukteswar, before Sri Yukteswar passed, and he told me how Sri Yukteswar had trembled a little bit at the thought of his impending transition. As I think he referred to it in the autobiography, Yukteswar's words, sometimes even a caged bird is reluctant to leave the cage even when the door is open because it has grown accustomed to the cage. He said Sri Yukteswar used to say, the boat that carries souls across the river of delusion is ready to depart. Who will go? Who will go? If no one goes, I will go. You be like that. And that's the way he talked to me. So that was the last time I saw him in the flesh. And then on March 7th, I was in Phoenix, and Herbert was over here in California. Herbert spent quite a bit of time with Master the day before Master passed. Did you drive the car that day when he went out to the Lake Shrine? With Frederick Clifford that day. And that night, Herbert called me and said, Master passed this evening. He told me a few details. And he said, you call the members and have a memorial service for the members there, and then come for the service here, which is what I did. And then after the memorial service, Dayamata said, it's Master's wish that Herbert come and be with us here in California, and you be the minister there at Phoenix. So that's what I did. But I never had the extensive training at Mount Washington. Ananda is probably and one or two other fellows I knew. But we didn't have much interaction in those days, personal interaction. I would visit, of course, and I would enter into the program, the scheduled activities when I was there, but I wasn't there that often. And which is all right with me. I mean, I love my brothers, I love Mount Washington, but I have never been one who has needed group support to motivate me and sustain me in my inner work. In fact, when I was at Phoenix, before Master passed and afterwards, my schedule that I chose myself was that I would get up in the morning at 3 and meditate until about 7, and I would meditate for almost an hour at noon, just doing Hong Sam mantra, just centering and watching the breath. And then in the evening from about 7 till 10, sometimes 11, I would meditate. So I did that. And Master never asked me about my spiritual practices when I saw him. He'd look at me and he would say, oh, look how well you are doing. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. And if I wasn't doing so well, which is, I didn't have too many downers, once or twice. If I was a little off course, he would say, I want to talk with you. And then he'd give me a few pointers. It was always encouraging, always encouraging. I was depressed one time because I wasn't enlightened yet. And he reminded me of St. Anthony in the tomb, and how long it took for him to experience that breakthrough. And he said, you be patient now, remember St. Anthony. And he said, he was so simple and direct, he said, life has to be lived anyway, so why not live in the highest way? So he was always so encouraging and supportive. And so my experience with him was very positive, and I don't live in the past, I have the good memories of Master. But he awakened the force in me, and he believed in me, he encouraged me, and I stayed with the organization until the autumn of 1953, and that time I felt I'd grown up on the farm, 18 years on the farm, almost 4 years. In the cloistered environment, I had no experience at all in the secular world, and I thought it was time to leave, and so I did. And so I've been active now all of these years. I was 2 years in the Army, but after that I've been active all of these years teaching. I sometimes say, which is true, I've never held a job in my life. Meaning I've never worked for anyone else. I've always ministered. In the early years, they were lean years, but I learned by doing, to teach and to speak and to write and to serve and to deepen my inner life. And it gets better and better. And Master is as real now as then. In fact, at a deeper level, there is even more real. And the gurus are real. So that's my brief experience and my testimony. So I'm very pleased to be here with you, and especially with Bob and Swamiji and others who I haven't been seen for some time. And it'll be very nice to have fellowship and interaction with you over the weekend. Okay, thank you.